Grounded by Obsidian Entertainment. Yep, those Obsidians. Weirdly, a survival game from a studio best known for its acclaimed RPGs. Despite this, my initial impressions of the game were so positive that I considered titling this video How to Create Survival Games, the best open world survival craft, the most user-oriented game, and more of the like. However, as I delved deeper into the game, I realized that these titles did not accurately capture my experience. So let's drop in for the journey and we'll see how a single game manages to combine some of the most user-oriented and at the same time some of the most annoying and frustrating elements ever. During the first few hours of Grounded, I started detecting how much of a background it actually has. It was evident that the developers had done monumental research on other survival crafts to figure out what worked and what didn't, which parts are just annoying and should be left out and which are essential for the genre. I always believed that those annoying and frustrating features from other titles are necessary for them to be challenging, and without them it probably would not be as fun. It is a survival after all, and surviving should be a tough task, but Grounded proved me wrong. Here, instead of being bothered, I felt free. Everything was done in a player-friendly manner and it was just a pleasure to play. It turns out that adding annoying, unnecessary and uncomfortable features is not necessary for the game to be challenging. Here are a couple of instances to explain this. Anything that you build, be it walls, storage or workstations, can be at any moment recycled back into their building materials with a full refund. This allows you to try things out, create temporary bases and stations with no fear of wasting resources. At the same time, structures also can be moved around for free. You can move stuff about as much as you want. This feature has a cool application where when you are getting logs, instead of carrying them to your base 5 at the time, you can move the log storage to your logging place, fill it with logs on the spot and then move it back. It can kinda feel like you are cheating the system, but ultimately it is just a way to not unnecessarily restrict your players and instead give them some liberty. Whenever I question things, can I do this? Is this possible? The answer usually was a resounding yes. Can I deposit everything right out of my inventory into chests automatically? Yes, there is a hot deposit system. Can I change game settings such as difficulty or friendly fire in the middle of the playthrough? Yes, and I don't even need to reload the world. Can I repair all of my armors and tools instead of crafting new ones? Yes again, and it is actually affordable. Can I select where would they respawn? Also yes, and many more questions like this that also had the same answer. This level of freedom is incredible and extremely unusual for modern gaming. All these excellent features are more than just years of background and experience, but also the result of great community work. The game was in early access for 2 years before its release in September 2022. I did not participate in this, but from my research and understanding, during this time there was great communication between the developers and their community. They listened to players' opinions and ideas and implemented this feedback right into the game.
I don't know. Excellent argument. Approved.
Even after the release, they continue to provide updates and improve the game based on players' feedback, like the 1.1 update that added some much needed quality of life features, such as the increase in backpack size and adding the ability to go up ziplines, solely because those features are what the community asked for. These player-oriented features may come across as some kind of an easy mode, where everything is handed to you and there are few restrictions. But on the contrary, Grounded did not feel easy at all. Instead, I would describe it as a comfortable and freeing gameplay experience. So, if everything is so warm and fuzzy and comfortable, why can't I say that this is the best survival craft? What's that about all the frustration? Well, you see, all I talked about just now are my thoughts based on the first 5 hours of the 40-hour-long game. As I progressed further, I started noticing that Grounded is far from flawless. Initially, it was minor things, like the lack of easy way to share the loot with my co-op partner or divide item stacks. But as the game advanced, it started getting worse, like the crafting became increasingly complex and tedious. After that, it was the extensive amount of running and overall concerns with exploration. However, the final nail in the coffin for me was the combat system and the poor endgame. Now let's delve deeper into each of these key gameplay segments to understand what exactly went wrong, kicking it off with the crafting. At first, crafting actually was one of the best parts. It is remarkably satisfying to see recipes come together and the straightforward requirements do not demand too much from you. It gets elevated thanks to the convenient features such as pulling resources from nearby storage and a useful search and filter function. Additionally, there is an in-game database of all discovered resources, which is a great reference tool. As the game progresses, crafting obviously becomes more and more complex, requiring increasingly expensive resources. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, and for some time recipes are more than manageable. But craft just kept getting more and more expensive and convoluted, until they reached a point where it just stops being any fun. Endgame recipes are brutally complicated, and it even would be fine if not for the fact that the last mission is time-based. Therefore, having powerful gear is more of a requirement than a luxury. Otherwise, you would not be quick enough. To just give you a glimpse of how much grinding is required, let's look at the process of crafting one of the top tier weapons. It requires you to obtain a special moss that can only be gathered with another late game weapon, the Widow Dagger. To make the dagger, players must first obtain 4 Super Spider Venom items, which only drops from the Black Widow spiders. These spiders are the game's hardest non-boss enemies and they are straight up frustrating opponents. Add to that there are only 4 of them on the map, one of which does not respawn, and you have yourself a terribly thought out system. After killing all 4 of them, how much venom do you think we got? 1. A single venom piece out of 4 hardest enemies in the game. On average they will respawn only after 4 to 6 in-game days without any way to skip more than 8 hours per day. Even after struggling through this and crafting this dagger, you would then need to gather the moss itself and other required rare resources for a single, non-upgraded weapon. I don't even know if it is good, because we had better things to do rather than wait for the spiders to respawn. And it's not like it is a single problematic recipe. Basically every late game equipment requires grinding, even if not as much as in this example. There are also other issues with the crafting system that becomes apparent while playing. For instance, there's no reliable way to recover HP except constantly crafting the same bandages over and over again. Or the food problem. It is a staple of the survival world that you need both water and food to survive. In Grounded, water is easy to handle. It seems quite thought out actually. Pretty early on you can get a renewable resource of water, storage to keep this water, and a canteen to take water with you. But the food on the other hand, it just feels like the food system is unfinished in comparison. There are no good craftable renewable food sources. The best and main food source are cooked bugs, but there are only a few that can be roasted with no way to farm or store any of them. Meat doesn't stack in inventory, taking up valuable space. And both raw and cooked food spoils after some time, making it impossible to prepare for later. The only alternative to cooked food is snacks, which are inferior in all ways imaginable, but are stackable and don't spoil. Unfortunately, this lack of viable options means players must constantly scavenge for food and deal with cluttering inventory, or just accept an inferior option. The game's solution to this conundrum is to just let players turn off food spoiling completely in the menu, which the game considers basically cheating and makes your playthrough not eligible for achievements. I just can't understand why would they make food so bothersome and not player oriented. Features like this do not make the gameplay any better, rather they add unnecessary annoyance to each playthrough.
Gross.
I guess that I need to mention the story too. I almost forgot because I have to admit that it wasn't the main focus of the game for me. That's not to say it's bad, but it didn't particularly stand out either. In Grounded we play as one of the 4 teens who have been mysteriously shrunk and find themselves in someone's backyard, with no memory of how they got there. It soon becomes clear that this backyard belongs to Dr. Wendell Tolley, the inventor of the shrinking technology. Your primary objective throughout the whole plot is to simply return home. To achieve this, you need to locate Dr. Tolley, craft an embiggening formula with his help, and grow bigger again. This is done by exploring the backyard and finding memory chips that can be fed to Dr. Tolley's robot assistant Burgle, who will help guide you in the right direction.
I am Burgle.
As you explore the backyard and visit Dr. Tolley's labs, you'll uncover more details about the story through audio logs, notes and conversations with Burgle. You'll learn about the relationship between the evil corporation Ominent, its leader Director Schmechter, and how they factor into your situation. You'll also discover more about Dr. Tolley's personal life, his plans for the shrinking technology, and the challenges he faced while developing it.
It appears that the mixer has agitated some of the local fauna, so... That's enough for today, Burgle.
Overall, it is a nice story that gives you a reason to move forward and makes exploring the backyard just this much more interesting. I would say that it is definitely better than most open-world survival crafts, but still miles away from fully story-driven games. And sadly, I doubt I'll remember many details from the story in a few months' time, except maybe the name of Director Schmechter and the shrinking technology itself. The backyard is an exciting place, filled with hidden treasures, fascinating sights and valuable resources, making exploration a meaningful and abundant experience. It is simply fun to run around discovering unique things, such as hedges full of crawling spiders, toys that seem massive from this angle, and catching a glimpse of an enormous koi fish while swimming in the pond. The attention to detail and amount of care put into crafting this world ensures it never feels empty. However, the vastness of the map, compared to the player size, presents some challenges. Without the fast travel or mounts, no matter where you build your base, there always will be things that you need to explore on the other end of the map. And this means a lot of running. Too much running. Running to some places and then back is probably a good fourth of the whole gameplay. While it's enjoyable to discover new areas and fight off unique enemies there, it becomes tedious when forced to run through this same area all the time, being attacked repeatedly by the same roaming bugs. Unfortunately, there is no way to clear the area to make it better for future you. Enemies will always respawn. What makes the situation even worse is that it is highly unlikely to explore a location fully on the first try. Most probably after finding something that you want to investigate, you will discover that you lack something to progress further. It can be a tool that you did not yet discover, some gear that you did not take with you, or a key that you don't know where to get. This requires you to backtrack and obtain whatever was needed, which is time consuming and annoying. Then you return, progress a bit, and encounter another obstacle with some new requirement that of course you don't have on yourself. Each time this felt horrible and irritating, especially when you thought you were prepared. To alleviate this, I just started carrying everything with me. Swimming gear, gas mask, all kind of tools, bombs, you name it. And each time the game still managed to surprise me with some new requirement that I didn't have on me. Add to all this, every time when your exploring is interrupted because you have a full inventory, there is a lack of food, water or healing, your armor broke, the torch depleted or you simply died. We sometimes had to attempt an area up to 10 times before fully exploring it, due to all these reasons. Overall, developers have a weird tendency of gatekeeping players from progressing by requiring specific items. While this is more than acceptable in some situations, such as needing a keycard to access a secret lab, there are other situations that are far more frustrating. For example, in one area you need sizzle protection to explore it because it is too hot, which is fine. The issue is that this location is also the main way to access the next area, so each time when you need to access the upper yard, you need to equip a sizzle protection armor or eat special food, which is a terrible game design. Alternatively, you can build a random floating stairway or try to parkour your way up the leaves. None of these ways sound like a good intended solution for this area. It feels like there should be an intended easy to access path, like somehow extinguishing the fire or finding a cave that leads where you need to go. But no, this is how they intend you to deal with this, by building a floating staircase, I guess. The only way to avoid annoying locations like this and spend less time running is to build a zipline, the only means of fast travel available. A bizarre and finicky way at that. Ziplines are expensive and require a lot of work to set up, including building weird towers for clear vision between two zipline anchors. Fortunately that now you at least can go up ziplines, because earlier if you wanted a two-way connection you would need to build two ziplines, which means twice as many resources and at least two towers. Another problem with them is that they can only carry you to a single place on a map. If you want to go to another place, you would need to still run there manually, or build another zipline contraption. All this, and they are not as fast as one would hope. The only zipline that we built in our world took us a full minute to travel one way, which is of course faster than just sprinting, but considering how much work setting it up is, you expect it to be better. Overall, ziplines are just not a satisfying means of fast travel, especially as the only alternative to manually running across the vast world. I will say it right away. The combat system is the biggest downfall of Grounded. It's riddled with so many issues that it makes the game's other enjoyable aspects hard to appreciate. The most prominent issue is that most enemies have massive HP pools and at the same time hit you like a truck, especially in the early game when you lack decent armor. A lot of enemies can simply one-shot you.
I can't catch my breath!
This results in fights that drag on for far too long, without much excitement. You'll find yourself spamming left click and occasionally dodging and blocking to avoid huge damage. And when you fail and get hit, you just eat some healing food and continue spamming. But the worst outlier is how freaking obscure the entire system is. Listen to this. There are 6 damage types, one of which is hidden and can only be found on the wiki. Additionally, there are 4 elemental damage types and various status effects like bleed, gas, poison and venom. Every enemy is resistant to some damage types, status effects and elements, while being vulnerable to others. Some enemies also have weak points, but only a few, and these weak points can only be taken advantage of with a acceptable damage type. Meaning, if you are hitting an ant in its weak point, but not with a stabbing weapon, it does nothing. And everything is reversed too, as enemies also have all these and even more damage types, elements and status effects that they apply to you, and you potentially can resist with different buffs and armor sets. And almost nothing of what I just said is referenced in the game itself. I needed to research this on the wiki, as for some reason developers decided to create this huge convoluted system, but failed to provide players with any information on how it actually works. Instead, players needed to examine game files to make sense of it and create a wiki, because the game can't even provide you with correct damage values. You only have an insufficient graphic that just outright lies to you. For example, this blade, this axe, this shovel and this arrow, while having absolutely different values on the HUD, all deal the same amount of 10 damage. The game is not trustworthy. Even when it tries to give you something, it either gives you the wrong data or is it too obscure. Heavy armor makes you use more stamina. How much more? This enemy is weak to spicy damage. What exactly does it mean? Does it stun them, make them bleed? Probably deals more damage, but how much more damage? Almost every armor gives you a status effect, and guess what? The description of these effects is way too vague to understand what they really do. You can argue that you can easily beat the whole game without researching wiki and diving into the damage numbers. Just bonk bugs on the head, what else do you need to know? And I agree. This is why I think that this whole system is just unnecessary. It is way too complicated and confusing for such a game. And this is probably the reason why there is such minuscule information on it in the game itself. Because developers created all this mess and instead of trying to fix it, just tried to hide it from the players, so they would not deem it too confusing and scary. However, it is just unclear to me why developers chose to design the combat system this way in the first place. Even if you can overlook the lack of information and overly complicated approach, the combat gameplay itself feels underdeveloped and unbalanced. Combat is not fun, and some approaches are vastly superior to others. The enemy design is lackluster. Despite the impressive visual and sound design of the bugs in the early game, which is actually one of the best parts of Grounded, the looks and sounds of all the bugs are immaculate. But even this immaculate design falls flat when you reach the endgame, where some enemies are nothing more than just recolors of earlier designs, as if developers ran out of passion. When it comes to gameplay design, it seems that the general approach here was to just give enemies a lot of HP and damage and then add some random weaknesses and resistances. This whole weakness-resistance ordeal is so restricting that it is revolting. Due to it, you can't just choose the weapons that you like and use it. Of course not, who would design a game like that? Half of the enemies that you encounter will resist your favorite weapon, so this forces you to have at least 2 on you, but better be sure and have at least 3 or 4. Remember I mentioned the worst enemy in the whole game? Yes, Black Widow. Without a doubt, one of the worst enemy designs I've encountered in gaming in quite some time. A non-boss enemy that casually resists every damage type there is in the game, including the rarest one that no other enemy in the whole game resists, even bosses. It literally has no weaknesses, while having the most health, dealing huge damage and applying both poison and venom status effects that also deal massive damage. And at least one such Black Widow is a required fight in the story. It begs the question, why would anyone design an enemy like this and make it a mandatory fight? How sadistic must you be to create such an enemy? Thanks to all these problems with combat, after being one shot for half of the playthrough, after being killed by random passing bugs, after dealing with obscurity, bad animations and unbalanced weapons, encountering the Black Widow was a final straw. Seeing a mandatory huge spider that resists everything that you have brings nothing but dread. Dying to it at the end of the long cave filled with endgame enemies. After that we just couldn't take it anymore. We decided to lower the difficulty. Not because of how hard the game was. It is more than manageable to win fights like this with a ton of healing, food, especially in co-op. But because of how frustrating and unenjoyable it was to deal with all of this. And you know what? To our disappointment, lowering the difficulty didn't save our playthrough. The only major thing difficulty changed is that enemies now dealt almost no damage, making it hard to die. But they still were punching bags with vast HP pools that weren't enjoyable to deal with. Although difficulty lowered the overall levels of frustration, it was still dreary and plain boring with no redeeming qualities. At this point, it is more than clear that the first few hours of Grounded were nearly perfect. I was convinced that it would be one of the best games I'd ever played. However, with each passing hour, my excitement dwindled as I encountered frustration after frustration. The game has a strange duality to it, capable of being the most amazing survival game 1 minute, only to completely change the next and reveal a game full of gatekeeping, obscurity and frustration. The only logical explanation I can think of is that something happened internally with the team that worked on this project. Perhaps their vision changed, or maybe the team itself changed. Otherwise, it's hard to understand why some design decisions are so player-oriented and comfortable, while others are the opposite. At least I enjoyed certain aspects of the game, such as base building and gathering resources. Unfortunately, my co-op partner is much more exploration and combat oriented, so Grounded got him exhausted quickly. If not for me, he would definitely give up on it not even halfway through. And I can't blame him for feeling that way, as even I, a thorough person who hates abandoning games, found it challenging to finish this one. My final recommendation is that the best way to approach Grounded is to only give it a chance if you're willing to overlook the combat, exploration and grinding issues, in exchange for the incredible world building, stunning visuals, sound design and decent crafting and building features. Otherwise, it would probably better to skip it.